third part of the trilogy of the Yin Yang murders. And this episode is Yang 3 and 2D, and it is season 5, episode 16. Who are you guys?
I'm Timothy Stevenson.
I'm Hannah Rademacher.
Awesome. So this episode starts off with a flashback from Sean, which is fairly eerie. He's riding on his bike, and you kind of see this very familiar black curly hair, which for people who have seen the episodes is very similar to the hair that Yang has. So we see this figure turn slowly, but that's all that we get for that. And it's kind of an eerie little thing to start off an episode, and sets the tone for the ending of this trilogy.
Yeah, 100%.
It also, the flashback ties in with the ending of the second episode too, when it shows Yin taking off his gloves and his mask and setting it down on the desk next to the photo of a young Sean next to what is evidently a young Yang.
Yeah.
And so that's really the audience's first viewpoint as to the connection, the very first connection that those two had, that at that point in time Sean doesn't even know about.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that connection has kind of been a part of this whole trilogy, and it is an obsession on the part of Yang to this boy that she met once, Sean Spencer, and then she's kind of followed him and his growing story, his mythology of becoming this psychic. So she's been following him, and her obsession has kind of led her to the point where she's at.
Yeah.
But this episode, a girl named Allison comes into the police station and says that she's been kidnapped by Mr. Yin. Immediately, everyone kind of doubts her, but the police chief says that it's a case and that they have to look into it regardless. Sean takes a chance and believes her. He puts faith in her because she's able to describe the layout of the house that she was apparently at. So Sean believes her, and then once he believes her, some other people start to believe her too. He believes her so much that he offers his old house where his dad currently lives for her to stay, to be protected.
Yeah.
And from this, it cuts to kind of a night scene where Henry, who's Sean's dad, is laying on the couch and he hears a loud bang. He goes out front and realizes that Allison might be gone. So he runs upstairs quickly to find an empty bed. And on this bed, there's a yin yang symbol carved out into the bed sheets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the things that they were that really messed with Henry in this episode was that he thought he had failed, which as his experience with being a police officer, a detective for Santa Barbara PD, it messed with him, especially when they were trying to figure out how he would have been able to lift her out, because as far as they could tell, she was not she didn't put up a struggle at all. She was just gone like a light, which messes with Henry's whole mojo and his headspace throughout the episode.
Right, he's always been this tough cop, I'm a really good, dare I say, best cop kind of attitude, and to have something like that happen, under his watch is detrimental to ultimately his mindset in this third episode.
Yeah, I think the one person who doesn't really get any credit throughout any of these episodes is Lassiter, who is the antagonist in some ways to Sean, where they're polar opposites, and he's no nonsense while Sean's
all nonsense.
All nonsense, yeah. So in this episode, he's the only person that's right about Allison. He doubts her and says that there's no way that there's no way that she could have been taken from the bed like that. There's no way that she was really kidnapped. While everyone else is believing her, he still has his doubts, and he's actually a very good policeman and detective, but I don't think he ever gets any credit for it, which is kind of interesting.
He's like cynical to a fault at some points, which I think is like builds up his character pretty well. Like to this point when you're like, oh, it's just Lassiter being Lassiter, and then you find out that like he actually has a pretty good intuition when it comes to these things.
Yeah. So yeah, in this episode, I know we had mentioned it earlier, but Yang really gets a lot of focus in this episode. She is trusted basically to help them solve this murder. So much to the fact where she's taken out of her custody, and at one point she's even taken out of her handcuffs and shackles. So they put a lot of faith in this murderer who's obsessed with Sean to help them solve this case, which I think is fairly interesting.
Yeah, that was definitely something I found probably the most interesting about it is like, was it almost worth it to like take that risk, you know, of bringing her out of her jail cell, and like you said at that one point even out of handcuffs, like, is it really worth it? Like, are we sure we can't do this, you know, by ourselves, you know?
Yeah. Which I think is like in that last episode of the season, like the previous season, when she does, like she learns a little bit of trust, like a little bit of faith from them. She doesn't really cash in on them, but like because of that like goodwill that she showed in the previous episode, they're a little more willing to like trust her and like not be so cynical towards her the entire time.
Right, and I think that just shows how much both Yin and Yang really got into the heads of, you know, everyone on that police force.
Yeah.
Except for, honestly, Lassiter.
Yeah. Yeah, and it also shows how far people are willing to go when it's something so serious.
Exactly.
I mean, Yang was someone who, you know, was notorious. They had been known for decades, and they get her behind bars, and then all of a sudden it's, well, maybe we need her. Maybe she needs to be on our side, which is, you know, it shows how far people are willing to go in such a serious moment. So continuing with the episode, really they start solving clues, and it leads them to this house where Sean and Gus go in and find Allison. Sorry, Abigail's his ex-girlfriend. And they find Allison strapped to a pole in the basement, and you know, they, being the heroes that they are, they try to save her, and all of a sudden she pulls a shotgun on them.
I hate to see it.
Which is not ideal. You don't like getting a shotgun pulled on you in a random basement. So she leads them through this house and eventually to the office of Mr. Yin.
That definitely came as a shock to me, as I'm sure it did the entire audience. I mean, this whole time you think, I mean, yeah, you have your doubts about Allison, but you still see her as, you know, the victim, and bam, shotgun, and you realize she's not so good. She's, you know, on Yin's team.
I don't know. I think it's interesting that she was able to play to Sean so well, which I think in any other circumstance, if it wouldn't have been like this slow build up to like this like moment and like this last season, this finale with Yin, that he wouldn't have like been so trusting of her at the beginning. But because he's like so determined to like do this, like he's like, that little cracks in her like persona that normally would be like red flags, he like is able to skim through them, and he's like, okay, well, like, yes, maybe, but possibly also she actually is, and he doesn't want to like put any like idea that it isn't what he like, that she could possibly like be a victim. They don't care about it at all.
Right, and it's not like Sean, it's not in his character to really, you know, skip over all these nitty-gritty details, you know? Sean in any other episode would have easily called out Allison's bullshit, but
Yeah, not this one.
not this one. And that's just because, again, the serious Sean is coming out in this trilogy, and so we really see the toll that the Yin Yang serial killer is having on his mindset, which affects his way of going about things.
So I think the scene where Yin is talking to Gus and Sean is kind of shows how good of a friendship and really like a I guess like a brotherhood
Yeah.
that Sean and Gus have. While they're literally in like there's
About
a
to
guy
get
with a
murdered.
needle about to kill them, and they're basically just telling each other that they would never have done it any other way, regardless of all the times that they argued and hated each other or pretended to hate each other. They just kind of show how much they really love each other and how much they love this kind of experience that they've been able to go on with each other.
Right.
I think that's probably my favorite episode, or my favorite part of this episode.
Oh yeah, especially like the banter that they do, the extent that they go to, which to not be murdered, like they take as long as possible, and they're just like arguing, and like you can see Yin is just like, what the hell is going on? Like he had no idea, like he knew about Sean and Gus, but I don't think he would have guessed how much of a banter they are able to produce
And
all the
it's-
time.
It's almost irony that happens at that moment, because now it's like, okay, well, this is probably the most serious, like the pinnacle of seriousness that not just this trilogy but this whole series comes to, is now, well, this is the closest Gus and Sean have ever been to death, and now the goofy side comes back, and
Yeah.
they're arguing with each other, random banter, and it was a stalling tactic,
Mhm.
but evidently it's still ironic that it happens, in this moment
Yeah.
as they're staring death in the face.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of another big reveal that happens at the end of this scene, which kind of saves them, as they're bullshitting their way to life, I guess.
Right.
Yang, who has been released from her shackles, walks into the room that they are in, and kind of turns everything on its head.
Oh yeah, when she first walked in there, I kind of forgot what happened in the episode, and I was just like super upset because like you start to like Yang even though she's like crazy and like kind of murderer, and you're just like the mentality you have when you see her go in there and you think that she's on Yin's side again. It throws you for a big loop, which ultimately makes like the end scene that much more poignant when she turns on him at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, so she flips, and we find out that Yin is her dad, and she's kind of been working with him and trying to
Make him proud.
or impress him or do whatever, basically just by following all of his rules and guidelines. But getting caught by the police was kind of like the last straw for Yin, so he really doesn't love or trust
He
his
no longer
daughter
cares about
anymore.
her,
Yeah.
which is like really sad.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
She's so upset.
So she makes the final brutal decision to stab and kill her dad. Well,
Mhm.
not stab, inject a needle into her dad, which kills her dad, but saves Sean, who she's more in love with and more obsessed with than she's
Mhm.
ever been with her dad.
Right, and this brings the audience to actually like Yang for the first time, probably.
I mean, I've liked her this entire time. I think she's just so interesting of a villain, like an antagonist, and like a lot of TV shows that you don't see, especially like her being like a woman, her being like this like crazy, like it's just not something you see. I don't think you see very often in television shows, and for them to like do that and like call her like Mr. Yang and like throw you off for so long, I think it adds a lot to her character and like who she is.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's episode 3, and that kind of concludes the Yin Yang trilogy. So, Yin's dead. Yang's
Back in prison.
back in prison.
I think she's
And-
happy though. I
Yeah,
think she's not sad.
She's happily in prison. And then our heroes are alive and well.
Oh, and Sean and Juliet, you find out, are together, which is very exciting if you've been watching the
Yes,
season.
which is all that really matters.
Yeah, ultimately, and like Yin and Yang are not important at all.
No.
It's just that scene.
Absolutely.
Right.
All right.